speakers. Hold on. Okay, how does this work for you?
I can hear you
Okay, good.
and you can hear me.
I can, yes. Any feedback that you don't like or everything's fine?
Nope, everything sounds okay on my end.
Okay, good.
All right. So let's just go ahead and start off. First off, thank you for joining me. I discovered you on Twitter and I really appreciated a lot of what you have to say. You have an encouraging outlook. You have a really positive redirect on a lot of the social narratives and rhetoric that are quite nasty and negative. And so I really appreciate that about you. So let's just dig in a little bit. What is your background with what you do?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So I have a little bit of an interesting story. I started out I went to Grinnell College back I graduated in 1990, which is probably before many of your audience was born, which is okay. Times were different back then. The social milieu was very different. Relationships between men and women were very different back then. And I went into technology for many years. And at some point in my early 40s, I just got tired of looking at a screen and clicking keys all day. And I'd always been very relationship oriented. So I decided to sign up to get my master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And I sat in the class with a lot of 22-year-olds, very funny stories because they're all talking about, at this time I already had 6 kids, and they're all talking about raising families and their family marriage therapists and, being married. And I just, said,
You had all this experience already and they were just stepping into it.
yeah, I mean, they weren't even married or anything. They were just taking classes. It was like,
Hmm.
uh, in any case, it was a lot of fun and a very good experience. I appreciated the opportunity to learn and to formalize my methodology. And then I started practicing and I immediately got drawn to Twitter. I just felt like there was a space here for another voice. This was back in 2017. A lot has changed since then.
Yes.
Um, and I got involved in the manosphere, which is, pretty hardcore group of guys that have pretty strong opinions. It didn't take long until I was kicked out officially.
Mm-mm. You lost your man card?
Yeah, I lost my man card.
Were you
And
officially declared a simp of any kind?
blue pill, sim,
Yeah.
beta, all the
Oh,
names that
yeah.
you and but at that point, I decided, what? The truth is that I had my own voice and I had my own philosophy and I had my own approach. And I decided instead of hiding behind all the rhetoric that they were pumping out, I decided to come out with my own content. And it was a great decision. I do have a lot of, friends on Twitter such as you that appreciate a little bit of a twist off of the narrative with the focus on the beauty of the relationship between
Yeah.
men and women instead of all the problems and our differences. And I think it's nice because it it doesn't totally stray from the message that they're trying to give over. They highlight a lot of real problems that
Hmm.
exist between men and women today. So it doesn't stray from that. I'm not living in fairyland, but on the other hand, it doesn't solutionize in the same negative, downtrodden, doomsday
Yeah.
approach. And instead, it brings out a lot of the potential that we have as people.
Yeah. And I imagine your 12-week course for building a better marriage probably implements some of this philosophy and redirect. So would you mind
Oh,
telling a little bit about what that method is behind it, what your foundational philosophy is, and then are you seeing that it's working with people?
oh yeah, for sure. So excited about this 12-week program that I have. It's just phenomenal. Probably the best part about it is that I do it with my wife, which really makes a huge difference. I mean, women need to speak to other women often.
Yeah.
And as much as my approach is important for the program, which it is, there's a certain percentage of a woman's soul that just really only can convey how they feel to another woman.
Yeah.
And my wife adds a lot, in particular because she has been a wife for 30 plus years. She's a mother of 6 kids, and she herself is a coach. So she's been through a lot. And so it turns out that she's a great resource for women when they approach the program. But one of the things about the program that I love the most, and it's a real reflection of my attitude in general, is that even though I'm billed as a marriage therapist, I like to describe myself as a marriage advocate.
Mm,
And that means that when a couple comes to me, I'm not fighting for him, I'm not fighting for her, I'm fighting for them.
hmm.
And they can really feel that, so every challenge, every issue, every conversation, every opportunity we have, we turn and we focus and we say, okay, how are we going to take this? How are we going to leverage this into positivity towards your relationship? And it's exactly what they really want, right? If they're coming to me, that means they want to save their marriage.
Yeah.
And even though it feels good for me to be like, oh yeah, you're right, he was such a jerk, or yeah, I can't believe she did that. Like even though that may be typical in some therapeutic offices, I don't do that. And my clients appreciate that. They don't want to be told that their negative view of their spouse is correct.
Yeah.
They, they want to be shown and explained and taught and to be heard in such a way that we reframe what the negative experience they're having into something which shows that they're a good spouse, that their husband is a good spouse, and that we can still make this work.
I like that. I like that. It's more, and it almost seems like you help them redirect to see that it's not what they're fighting about, it's what they're fighting for.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a great line. I'm going to
Yeah,
remember
it's not
that.
mine. I stole that from Esther Perel. I've been engulfed in her material over the
Oh,
last
yeah.
week.
Yeah,
She's got a
she's
new
great.
course coming that just came out, so I'm preparing for that.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Yeah,
she's fantastic. She's the queen, Queen Bee.
she really is. Yeah, she's very influential, very experienced. But I imagine you having all this experience before you even went after your degree for this was almost like what did it feel like you were just recalling memories and experiences and you're like, "Oh yeah, now I understand what this is. Like I can put to words these things I've already experienced."
Yeah, a lot of it. My father was a very relationship oriented person. And so he really taught all of his children, how to be in relationship and some of the more important fundamentals. I also am a Hasidic Jewish person, so our entire perspective of God is all about relationships.
Mm,
So that's how we connect to God, and that's our entire perspective of God is that God loves us and we love God. And how do we manage that relationship? There's boundaries, there's kindnesses, there's we serve God, there's duty, responsibility, there's
mhm.
praise, there's appreciation, there's repentance, there's apologies. I mean, it really mimics in so many ways a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
And so when I went to school, what I really loved was that I was able to put more, let's just say, secular
Mm.
methodological approaches to a lot of this philosophy and upbringing that I had already.
Yeah. Yeah. So your principles and your values are just kind of folded into all of these dimensions then. And so now it was like you had to see it in a different view, almost as like a third party now, witnessing over yourself. And I found something similar too. I have a more Christian background. And when I really dove into psychology, I was already seeing that from a theological background about this relational transcendence that you experience within spirituality and with God in that relationship, and how, the marriage relationship is to mirror that to a degree. And so I saw that terminology come into play too, and started, I think, for myself, really understanding other people's experiences that had maybe previously confused me. And now I had the verbiage to attach to it and a different lens to go. It all just kind of folds into each other, really, when we
Oh yeah.
start stepping back and looking at it. So, with these foundations that you're already practicing in your life, how do they incorporate into your practice in your course? Like, what are your top 5 foundations for a healthy marriage?
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I do talk about this on Twitter. Um, it took me a while to develop exactly what I felt was the most important, fundamentals of creating a good relationship. And one thing which underlies my entire program and just my entire attitude about marriage in general is this idea that marriage is more about what you do than how you feel.
Yeah.
So I'll start again. So yeah, it took me a while to figure out exactly, there's so many aspects and dimensions to marriage, what's the most important, and it's hard to put it into words. It's hard to put it into a paradigm that's going to fit,
Yeah.
for a generic course for everybody. But I feel like I really whittled it down to five, characters and actions that we need to take in order to have a great marriage. Again, it's all in line with what I like to say that marriage is more about what you do than how you feel, which is a little bit, that itself is a little bit revolutionary in the sense because so many people, certainly on the way out of a marriage, that's when you hear almost all the time, she didn't make me happy. I'm not happy in this relationship. He's not fulfilling my needs, right? That's a sign that you're completely focused on your feelings, which is yeah, obviously marriage has room for feelings. But when we adopt the perspective that marriage is more about what you do, then a lot can change. So the first principle, which is the most important and stays with us throughout the entire program, and God willing will stay with people for their entire lives, is the first foundation, which is appreciation, gratitude, and affection.
Oh, yeah.
The most important um, character trait that you can bring to a marriage if you want to be happy is to be infatuated with your spouse, to be in love with your spouse, to see good in your spouse. If you can't see anything positive in this person, it's going to be miserable. It's not just going to be miserable for you, it's going to be miserable for your partner.
Hmm.
And I guarantee this to every couple that comes to me, that there are thousands of ways that your spouse is worthy of appreciation. Thousands. And it's oftentimes the most interesting hill to climb, just getting the person on the other end of the phone to see something that they can appreciate in their spouse. I always say that noticing is the most difficult challenge. But
Hmm.
once you get good at noticing, it's like a snowball. Because once your eyes are open to all the things that your partner does for you, so many times I'll say to someone, well, give me five things that your spouse did today that's worthy of appreciation. And, I have blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, well, I didn't see anything today. We haven't really talked. So I say, okay, well, where is he? Well, he's at work. We didn't get a chance to have a conversation yet today. Oh, so he's responsible. He supports the family. He's working hard for you. Yeah. Okay. And did he say goodbye before he left? Oh, yes, he did. He makes sure to kiss the kids and to say goodbye to me. Oh, so he's communicative. He's family oriented, right? So once we start getting the ball rolling, one of my favorite exercises, as I say, give me five things. And before you know it, the other person's at number 20, 21,
Hmm.
22, right? So that's the first foundation. And that has to stay, that'll stay for the entire course of the program, and God willing, like I said, for the rest of their lives. Because the more appreciative, just in general, we are of life, the more joy
Yeah.
we have.
Attitude of
Okay.
gratitude.
Yeah.
Yep.
The second thing that we really learn about has to do with communication, but the flip side, which is learning to be a compassionate listener.
Listener. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really important because even though speaking and expressing yourself is so critical, learning how to receive somebody's reality and giving it the significance and importance it deserves is probably the number one make or break in terms of your communication,
Yeah.
right? Getting defensive, getting angry, turning it about you, closing, shutting your partner down, not paying attention. These
Hmm.
things will cause your partner to turn away very quickly and to lose complete trust in you,
Yeah.
right? So we have to learn how to be compassionate, and that's very challenging. it's easier to be compassionate when my wife comes home and tells me stories about somebody at work that offended her. Then I can show up with tons of, oh, I can't believe they did that. And wow, that must have hurt your feelings, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
my wife comes home and tells me something about me, all of a sudden, all those skills that I had go right out the window.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, we're gonna
The
talk about me? Nuh-uh. I'm perfect.
How dare you,
Yeah.
right? Um, the third foundation, which is very important, is learning how to express yourself, communication, right? Relationship-oriented communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes human beings are experts in speaking to people in different ways. So I would never speak to my father like I would speak to my son. I would never speak to my coworker the way I would speak to my boss, right? And I would never make that mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I may say to my coworker, "Hey, can you pick up the copies for me at the printer?" But I wouldn't say that to my boss. I would tell my son to take the garbage out before he leaves the house. But if my dad came to visit, I wouldn't even make the mistake to say to my father, "Oh, can you just take the garbage out to the bins before you leave?" Never. But yet with my spouse, a spouse oftentimes becomes the trash bin of all the different
Yeah.
methodologies, depending on whatever we want to get across. We don't even think twice about the way we speak to our spouse,
Yeah.
right? So that's a mistake on our parts that has deep impact in our relationship. No criticism, no blame, no shaming, no finger pointing, right? That these are basics in terms of speaking appropriately and creating communication where you can get your feelings across.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth foundation, which we talk about, is setting boundaries. Boundaries is a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
Most people aren't really that good at setting boundaries. I'm the worst.
Yeah. Or they're really good at setting boundaries for other people.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true. Yeah, that it's I have two parts to this boundary module. One is the how to set boundaries, and the other one is how to receive boundaries,
Mm,
right? They're both important.
yeah.
And the most important thing about a boundary is is that oftentimes, boundaries by their very nature separate us, right? Because on some level, I'm saying no to something that you want. When I say no to you, I'm separating us,
Yeah.
right? You want something, and I'm saying no. But on a deeper level, which is important for us to focus on, boundaries are actually the purpose of a boundary is to connect us, to keep
Mm,
us close. Because when I'm saying no to you, I'm saying no to you because I'm saying to you, hey, I love you and I love our relationship. And if I were to say yes to this, that would bring a separation between us because because I can't do this with an authentic heart.
yeah.
So in order to protect us, I'm going to say no to this. I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying no to protect what's really important, which is our relationship. And that message gets lost when we say, for most people, when we set a boundary, right? So we need to learn how to set boundaries with love, the key, so that we don't push our partners away and make them feel rejected or disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And the fifth module, which is the funnest, is about sex.
Save the
Uh,
best for last.
yeah. Uh, it, you know, Having a good sex life for the first 5 years of marriage shouldn't be that hard,
Right.
right? But once you start getting to 20 years, 30 years and beyond, it gets more difficult. So when kids are involved, when children are part of the equation, when financial hardship hits, how do we set up a perspective, an attitude towards intimacy, a schedule around intimacy such that all of our needs are being met and that it can go the distance, right? Marriage is a long time, and we always want to be desirous of our wife, and we
Mm-hmm.
always want our wife to feel comfortable being with her husband. So we have to set up something, this idea that, well, we'll just have sex whenever we feel like it, I wish that worked. If it worked, it wouldn't be one of my top five top five things, but it
Yeah.
usually doesn't work. what has been your experience with some of these topics that I'm bringing up? Like, what do you think about it?
Well, first, I think I I have worked out my own kind of module of main foundations as well for my own coaching philosophy. And, you know, gratitude is at the top of my list too. And these other concepts are, clearly super beneficial to relationships. And how do you, condense such complex relationships with so few concepts. And
Mhm.
so what I would say is these are things I'm like, I didn't even think about that before. Like I understand setting boundaries in practice, but as a foundation, I think just because of my own personal experience, I was late in the game in boundary setting. Like recently, within the last 2 years, I've been like, I suck at boundaries, really, don't I, babe? And he's like, you can, yeah, you know? And so I'm just seeing that these are all really good foundations to really stand your marriage on. Um, especially with the listening part too. I remember I took a couple years in nonviolent communication. And I did that because I was realizing I was really articulate and really great at communicating with people, but I sucked at communicating with a large variety of people. Like, and sometimes I would almost, and my kids told me this when I was, when they were growing up, my older ones, I would get way too intellectual with them and academic, right? Because I was in the throes of academia and learning. And they'd be like, can't you just talk to us like a kid? And then my husband would get to a point like, can you just talk to me like your husband and not a client, you know? And so I went through this nonviolent communication thing, but the listening thing was the one thing I was like, I don't think I'm a good listener. So that was new to me. And I would say within like the last 8 years or so, the whole listening part became really, really important in my own relationship because my husband and I were both shitty listeners. And now I think we're getting better. It's funny is we'll fight over the nonviolent communication, stipulates this, and we're activated and we're trying to one up each other on our knowledge of the communication and listening. And
Aha.
that's always a fun part of the conflict. But
It gets violent.
yeah, and the intimacy and the desire component, right, is I'm assuming is the sex. It's probably both intimacy and desire. I recognize those as two kind of separate realms.
Okay.
And I realize, how important both are. And I think that's, when I'm dealing with my clientele base, the sexlessness in marriages is a huge trend right now. And it's because I think we don't understand the concept of maintaining intimacy. And then I think to a degree, and this is just something I've come to understand recently, thanks to Esther Perel and Jack Morin, is, intimacy and desire are kind of two separate ideas. We want intimacy, but sometimes intimacy and desire don't work together. And so there's this formula and equation for desire, which is attraction plus an obstacle. And so it's like we have to be able, that's what develops that desire for us within our relationship. There's an obstacle, which taught me, and I recognize this in my own relationship, that when we have too much intimacy, too much closeness, too much availability, too much accessibility, or I'm here if you want me, that can deaden desire and make me go, ugh, yeah, I mean, sure, it's there. I can take it if I want it, but I want it. I want to want it. And so
Sure.
in recent years, learning how to discover how to maintain that desire and
Sure.
intimacy and seeing them separately, but both needed and necessary within our,
Yeah.
you know, oscillating within our relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. It is like a little bit of a dance,
Yeah, exactly.
it's a little bit of a push-pull type dynamic. And it's not easy to figure out, you know. I know in the Jewish religion, one of the biggest techniques that's utilized, and it's not the reason, but it happens to correlate with this, is a degree of abstinence.
Mm.
And I look at the women, I look at women as kind of in charge of it. I know it sounds a little strange, but I view the intimate life, that connection, heart to heart, body to body, as kind of the realm of the feminine, even though a man will always show up for sure.
Hmm.
But I kind of put it in her lap to manage that dynamic. And one of the most effective ways, in my opinion, of keeping that energy going is to not always be available,
Hmm.
to have a sense, because women have this intuition of how things are going in their relationship, have the ability to, you know, be available at the right time, and then also know when it's too much for the relationship,
Yeah.
you know, and that keeps the man on his toes. I'm talking within a loving relationship here, a respectful relationship.
Yeah.
That keeps a man, always pursuing,
Yeah.
and yeah, that works really well for us and for a lot of my clients, where it's like there's always a sense of desire, a sense of longing, a sense of wanting, and then a sense of consummating.
Yeah.
And then we go right back into that cycle again.
Yeah.
When
And your foundations here though are almost kind of like different phases of the cycle that help keep perpetuating that desire too, I think, because I recognize the more we did this whole attitude of gratitude and we affirmed each other and appreciated each other and were more affectionate with each other, that gives you more space and comfort in further developing your communication style and your listening style. And then that helps you learn how to verbalize the boundaries you want to establish, which helps you kind of maintain that intimacy and desire, right? And then
oh, totally.
the way I see it anyway, just from looking over your
Oh yeah,
ideas, is it's almost a cycle that just kind of keeps the whole thing going.
sure,
And
sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, the that's why I say about the first one that it's definitely, it's going to be with us for the entire program
Hmm.
and for the rest of their life, God willing. Because I've had people that after the first few weeks, after we start getting into the kindness and the appreciation and the affection module, where they really hit that one hard, and after the first 2 or 3 weeks, they don't even remember why they they don't even remember why they came to me, right?
Yeah,
They
they're like,
literally
wait, I
don't
love
know.
her. I love her. What was it? I love this woman. Yeah.
Exactly. And I always say to them, I say, when you feel like I've ripped you off, that's when I know I've done a good job.
Yeah.
When you feel like you don't remember why you paid me all this money to help you in your marriage, like, why am I seeing this guy again? Like, I don't get it, And I'm like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's just absolutely perfect. Uh, I have a funny story about this, if we have time for a funny story.
Oh, we have time for funny stories. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I remember one of my, after I had developed this program and I had done it with a bunch of clients already, and this couple from Kentucky came to me, and they did, sign up my program. She's a big in medicine, and he was a big musician. And one thing that I do, this is a little bit unique. I don't know how many other people are doing it. I don't hear much about it, is that I in general don't see the couple together.
Mm.
I usually meet with them separately. And I do that because I like to say I would never put an angry tiger and a hungry lion in the same room together just to see what happens. Not not interested.
Yeah.
So I have her on the phone, for session number one, and we go through this, exercise of give me 5 reasons why you fell in love with your husband. And again, she rolls into 20 reasons in the first few minutes. And she struggles at first, and then give her a little bit of a hint. And then before you know it, she's rattling off 20 great things. He's kind, and he's funny, and he's smart, and he's protective, and he's handsome, and he can be sexy, and he's good with the kids, and he's family oriented, and he's honorable, and respect, she just keeps rolling these things off with all these examples, and she's excited, and her whole demeanor is changing. And say, okay, good. Now we're going to do the first homework, which is going to be you're going to express this to him every day. You're going to choose one of these things. I send her the list that she gave me. I write everything down. Um, and I said, okay, you're going to express these to him every day via text message. I want to see a screenshot. So she goes ahead, and the husband was due to have his session. That was like a Tuesday. The husband was supposed to meet me on Thursday. So Thursday morning, I get an email from the husband saying he can't make it. Okay. He's a big executive, no problem. Next Tuesday rolls along, and the wife comes back on the phone. It's her session, and she says, "Oh, I don't know what you said to him, but wow, I'm seeing such changes in the marriage. I'm so excited. Thank you so much. Let's do, module number two." And we had a great weekend together, and I don't know, he's changed. So, I don't say anything on if it's not broken, I'm not gonna
Right.
fix it.
Right.
I'm like, okay, great. I'm like, yeah, no, your husband, definitely expressed a desire because he did when he had a clarity call with him, and he's like, I know he loves you, da da da. How's a marriage advocate? So we have the next thing, which is being a good listener, and she's listening, and she's like, yeah, I have problems listening, and I'm going to show him more compassion, and sometimes he comes home from work, and I don't really know how to relate to him, and I thank you so much, and yeah, I'm definitely going to implement these. Wow, great. So I'm supposed to meet him again on Thursday. Thursday afternoon comes, no show. So I text him. He's like, I can't. I'm in the middle of this meeting, but we'll do it sometime next week. I said, okay. So again, I have her the following Tuesday. So she's like, oh, my marriage couldn't be better. I don't even know what I'm doing here with you. She's like, everything's perfect. Da, 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 da. I don't know what you're telling him. For years, I've been trying to get him to change, and you're a magic man.
Wow.
So
And she still doesn't know.
no,
He's
she doesn't
not
know because what's
okay.
one of the rules? You're not supposed to
Yep.
talk about,
Yep.
that's part of my thing is like, we don't, we stop talking about the relationship. You're not supposed to discuss all this stuff because I find that oftentimes couples will get into fights if they,
Yeah.
oh, he told you to do this and you're not doing that. I don't like any of that stuff,
Oh yeah.
So, um, in any case, at this point, I had to tell her. I mean, I just, she's like, well, what did he say about me? Da 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 da. So she started asking me questions. She's like, is he also seeing changes that I'm doing? Da 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 da. So I'm like silent over the phone. She's like, wait a second, have you met?
Fascinating.
The power of the positivity, the power of the change that occurs to somebody when they express appreciation, when they focus on the positive, when they are enthusiastic about their marriage is
Yeah.
enormous. And I know this about everybody I meet, and it's like my job just to somehow get them across that threshold because I know when I meet these couples that that's why I call my program recreating intimacy. I tell them right from the beginning, I'm not doing anything here. I'm just helping you two bring out the love that you two already have for each other. There's
Yeah, they just needed a
nothing
reminder.
they need a reminder and they need the methods, right? Because it's the devil's
Yeah.
in the details, right? That's why these five foundations, if you're appreciative of your wife and if you're kind to her and if you show her affection, that's the first one. If you learn how to listen so that you're not defensive and you're better at communicating your needs so you don't blame her. If you know how to set boundaries such that without pushing her away and that are respectful of your relationship for the sake of protecting your relationship, and you're having great sex, what do you think's going to happen to your relationship? You tell
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
You already love each other. That part you already have. You don't. You
What's really interesting too is that I think this just kind of demonstrates this idea that when you change yourself, you can change your relationship and you can change others. And it was just her being more appreciative. And, we're mimetic creatures, we're going to imitate each other. And so if you're producing this energy, you've just invited me into that energy. And now I want to engage that energy. But then I am also in the back of my head and I'm like, was this a little trick he devised? Like, I'm not the one that needs the work, she does. Look, I was no, I'm just kidding.
it
But
could be.
I've noticed that with my own husband, right? Like I've gone through courses and I've done these, clinical lectures and workshops, and I go and I'm like, here, learn it all, just like I did. And he's like, why don't you just practice it, baby? And I practice it, and then I'm like, hey, he's like, yes. Yes, because you invite them into that energy and
Yeah.
they want to match you. That's the thing that I recognize deeply is we can either be reflections of our egos to one another or we can be reflections of our highest self to one another.
Oh,
And
that's a good point.
if we're in the same environment, we're eventually going to match each other's energy. So it's like you have to decide what you're grounding your energy in for that day and just keep inviting your partner in to match it with you.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like I talk about something called the positivity quotient in your relationship.
Mm,
Most couples that come to me on a scale of 1 to 10 are somewhere about a 3 or a 4.
mm,
A 1 or a 2 are people who are having affairs or they're checked out.
yeah.
They're just got they already have a foot and a half out the door. Or there's like serious abuse going on. It doesn't not necessarily domestic violence, but emotional abuse, or maybe there's addictions like gambling or pornography that's out of control, or something like that. Most of the clients that I see come to me somewhere around a 3 or 4, right? And my job is to raise the positivity of the relationship up to a 7 or an 8. And when that happens, what's really incredible is that when a dip comes, which it always does, right? They're they automatically know how to bring it back up,
Mm,
right? Because they have what to lose. I don't know if you've ever met couples like this where they're always bickering. So what's the big deal? You sling a little bit more mud, right? She called
mm,
me a name yesterday, so I'm just going to use a swear word today, right? That's what happens when you're all the way sitting down on a 3 or a 4. You can't get out of this cycle of, and you talked about violence. They call it in domestic violence training the cycle of violence, right? So,
mhm.
so it could be emotional abuse where you're just emotionally abusing each other because you just can't seem to get out. But once we raise the positivity quotient of your relationship, you don't want to ruin that.
Mm-mm.
You don't want to say something stupid. And if you do, you want to correct it immediately because you don't want to go back down to a 3. You're not interested in that. You've already made it,
Yeah.
right? So people start being again on their best behavior. And it's like this energy that you just want to keep up.
Yeah.
It's really amazing how this works. A little bit of change can really restore and bring positive. That's why I tell clients that things are going to shift right away. If the first 3 or 4 sessions, you're not going to recognize your marriage.
Yeah. Especially if you're really open to it, right? And you really believe in your own capacity to put that into action and to actually see change. Um, but there's so many naysayers out there, right? Just spitting all over the concept of marriage and long-term relationship, and even to the degree of this assumption now that people can't change. You hear once a cheater, always a cheater, or if they use porn, they're always going to use porn. But then I think, what happened to our ability to recognize love transforms people? And when we're doing love right, people just naturally realize I, I'm doing something here that's screwing with everything. Let's fix it,
Oh yeah.
because that's what love does. It's you're like, yeah, I gotta change for this. I have to get on board with this. What do you do when people come to you and they are struggling with porn and porn is the interruption in their relationship?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that people come to me with, whether it's pornography, which is definitely something, or whether, one of the spouses is attracted to somebody else,
Mm,
or there are other vices, also alcoholism and gambling that people have. What I like to do when I run into these things now there are like addiction counselors, right?
hmm.
So I'm not really although I was trained in addictions because that's part of my license, I don't look at myself as an addiction counselor. But what I like to do when I work with couples regarding these types of things, let's just focus in on porn since you asked, is I try to increase like I said before, I try to increase the positivity of the relationship and the the beauty that they're experiencing in their current dynamic such that they don't feel the need to go outside the marriage to feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily address the porn in particular because I don't want to bring, let's just say, shame or another type of work to the work that we're doing. But what I want to do is I want to get that person fully engaged on being a super husband or being a super wife, or helping them, be the best version, as like they say in the manosphere, being the best version of themselves, whether it's going to the gym, making sure that he's, a family man, hanging out with his kids, taking care of his financial obligations and having his wife fall in love with him. And then he gets the feedback, the positive feedback from that. And I found that in, many circumstances that the need or desire for any of these external, let's just call them destructive habits, wanes significantly. I don't call myself an addiction counselor, so I don't like focus in on that in
Yeah.
particular. But like I said, I find that once we bring purpose, meaning, pleasure, joy, ecstasy through the family and marriage, that oftentimes, well, there's even video games. I work with people that you can't believe,
Mm,
they come home from work and they're addicted to video games for hours, right?
yeah.
And so how do you address that? And
Yeah.
my methodology, like I said, is to get them super hyped about their marriage and their relationship. And that usually has a really beneficial effect.
So you redirect the focus on what is working in your marriage. What do you like about your marriage? What do you like about your partner? And not so much focus on this one flaw that's taking up your time, but then more, can we redirect your time and attention towards what is working?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
and
I
what's
like
going to
that.
give them meaning, right?
Yeah.
And they agree with it.
Yeah.
I don't get arguments,
Yeah.
right? If you ask a gamer, what would they rather have? A great relationship with their children, with their wives, maybe a new, working on their career, going to the gym. They agree with that.
Yeah.
They're not arguing with me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's usually they just didn't think about it.
They didn't think about it or they failed in the past,
Yeah.
right? They've made an effort and it hasn't worked out, or they tried with their wife and they got rejected, or
Yeah.
they're just not good at interpersonal communications and they don't know what to do. People oftentimes, one of the first questions I ask when somebody says, well, she's not showing up for me in this way, or I'm upset at my husband because of X, Y, and Z. One of the first things I say to myself is, okay, well, how many times did your husband actually try to show up for you that way and felt rejected from you?
Yeah.
I don't say that out loud yet.
Yeah.
I will once I get him on the phone and find out the story behind the story. But at that point, because there's a dynamic between us, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Emotional safety. I've seen that this is something that you've discussed on your Twitter. A lot of people don't understand what emotional safety even means.
Mhm.
Or, in my experience, I've had clients go, well, I have provided her with emotional safety, but it's not working. So if you had to just define it and what it looks like in action, what would
Mhm.
that look like for you?
Yeah, emotional safety is the big one because that is highly contradictory to the general manosphere idea that in order to get the most out of your wife, you have to keep her on her relationship toes. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever heard that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I've heard Andrew Tate directly speak on this idea that she needs to know she is so replaceable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And old school would call it spinning plates. And the
Yeah.
idea behind spinning plates is that you're threatening that you have multiple girls or multiple opportunities, right? And and that works. The truth is that works,
Mhm.
right? It works for all of us. It works if I go into an office and I work in an office and I know that my boss can pick up the phone and get somebody to replace me, I'm going to show up
Yeah.
more, you know, more attentive to my job, right? So I don't even deny that it works. However, what I do say is that it is not conducive to a loving, intimate, authentic relationship. And that in the end, it'll just cause the destruction of your relationship. And I think that's true because even most of the people that espouse these theories, I don't know if they've been married for 30 years. Most of them haven't, right? They've been through a couple divorces, or they just have a bunch of girlfriends, or they're just talking, from wishful thinking in a
Yeah.
lot of the cases. Uh, why is that? Because the number one way to a woman's heart for her to open up her heart is for her to feel that she is valued and important and vital to your life, right? That's how she feels. That's the way to get her, not to get her, that's the way to invite her, like you used the word invite before, invite her to be vulnerable with you and open with you and to
Mhm.
want to show up fully for you.
Yeah.
right? There's no showing up. A woman's not going to open herself up and show up the way she really is if she feels that if you see something you don't like, you're going to escort her out the door,
Yeah.
right? And without her showing up the way she authentically is, you're not getting the real her. She's just putting on a show. And so that's not the foundation of building a marriage. That may work for a girlfriend that if you're trying to get something out of her, but that's not what I deal in. I deal in having a great marriage. And many men don't understand this. Because men don't have this need anywhere near where a woman needs it.
Yeah.
So we don't get it. We may we may click on the Instagram models, we may click the like button on Instagram models that we see. We may engage in pornography, we may flirt with other girls, we may not think it's a big deal, X, Y, and Z. We may, heaven forbid, talking already if you're in a marriage situation, heaven forbid we could bring up the topic of divorce if we get into an argument.
Mm.
Some people walk out the door, threaten to leave, right? These things many men don't realize the extent of damage you cause in your relationship by keeping her at arm's length with always the threat that you're not going to stick it out.
Yeah.
And when that happens, she turns cold. There's a piece of her that dies. There's a piece of that trust that she has for you and in your relationship that dies. And eventually she turns cold, and then she eventually checks out.
Can relate. Can relate. My husband, and this is something he doesn't do anymore, but when we would get into arguments, when there would be a big conflict, he needed to remove himself physically from my proximity, which I understood, right? I always understood he had to go cool off or walk away because sometimes I speak in paragraphs and yell in novels. And and he would get into this habit of driving away. And I'd be like, whoa, 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 you can't do this. My dad did this. This left an imprint for me. You can't do this to me.
Right.
And so eventually he stopped because after many years, I finally was like, my dad did this to me. This freaked me the hell out. I would hide under my covers. When you do this to me, and even bringing up the divorce thing, right? He'd be like, well, do you just want to get divorced? And I'd be like, no, I want to work
No.
this out, and I'm not saying I haven't said the D word either, but just saying that even if you forgive each other and even if you realize you said it in the moment, unconsciously, it can stay with you.
Consciously, not unconsciously,
Yeah,
consciously.
but consciously too. And that comes around and it just weighs on you. And so the next time there's a potential activation, you're like, are you going to leave again? Are you going to threaten to leave
Totally.
again? And then it's like, how long does it take me to get back into a place of that's not going to happen, you know?
Right.
And I agree. I think a lot of men don't think about that.
Well,
And that's
well,
not
what
just,
happens to you? I want to ask you if you don't mind.
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
interrupt you because this is so raw right now. What happens to you when you feel that? When you feel that my husband could leave? Like, talk to me a little, if you feel comfortable, talk to me a little bit about what changes occur in you and your ability to be in relationship when that's put out there as a possibility.
I instantly get angry. I mean, I get very angry. And then I get really sad and I just get scared. And then it's like I second guess everything, that just took place. And then it makes me second guess a whole lot after that. And just, should I even address this? Should I even address conflict? We've gone through phases like that where we've been honest with each other where I don't want to bring something up because then this happens. And so then I can't feel vulnerable with you to express myself. And what does scare me, because, you know, you worry that they're going to hold it against you next time too,
Mm,
which does happen in a lot of relationships. And it's happened, within mine. My husband and I have done that. We've had that emotional warfare with each other where we dangle vulnerable stuff back at each other. And it's,
right.
it's cruel. It's a cruel thing to do, but yeah, it puts you in this state of panic and uncertainty. And, it damn sure doesn't make me want to go take him upstairs to the bedroom after that.
Right.
It makes me want to go, I want to emotionally punish you somehow because you made me feel so abandoned and distant that,
Mhm.
well, I know what you'll be after, and I'm going to make, I want to make you feel the same, which is, you know,
It's just a
not
cycle.
anything I'm endorsing or encouraging that whole I'm going to do to you what you did to me. But that's what happens when we break down
Sure.
into ego, I think for sure. And yeah, overall in general, and I think women can relate to this. And men can too, especially when they get vulnerable and it happens to them. It makes you not want to speak to each other and tell each other what's bothering you and tell each other
Mhm.
what's wrong
Totally.
because there's a threat that this is going to be the one thing I tell you that ends us, you know?
Right.
And so my husband and I came to an agreement, and we've been really good at following through with it too, is do not say that word unless you mean it. And it doesn't matter what we're going through. This is not the thing that's going to break us. We've been through infidelity. We've been through, you know, so much. And so if that didn't break us, we just want to affirm for each other like this isn't going to break us when there's an argument or a conflict. It doesn't mean it's over. It just means this thing has to be over, not the whole relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, that's I'm glad that you guys kind of work through that and realize, um, that just because you're just because your relationship is going through bad times doesn't mean you have a bad relationship. It
Right.
just means you're going through bad times.
Yeah.
And one thing that I like to remind the couples that I work with is that going through difficulties in a relationship doesn't mean that this was the wrong relationship.
Mhm.
It just means that you're in relationship. That's all it
Yeah.
means. That's all it means. Because that's what, if you think about it from a more spiritual, you said you're a Christian woman. Well, one thing I like, one kind of metaphor that I like to use is, we're two halves. A husband and wife are two halves of the same soul. And the trick is that we're supposed to unite. These two halves are supposed to come back together. So one's in your body and one's in your half of it's in your body and half of it's in your husband's body, right?
Mm.
But how's that going to happen? Right? You're a woman, he's a man. You grew up in this environment, he grew up in that environment. Sometimes people speak different languages in our different cultures, right? Very
Mhm.
common, that people get married from it. He's introverted, you're extroverted. And the differences between you and your husband are infinite.
Yeah.
And yet, the purpose of marriage is to bring you to oneness. So expect some bumps along the way.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like putting, two puzzle pieces that just fit directly.
Yeah.
It's more like trying to shove a square peg through a round hole,
Yeah.
and everybody comes out okay at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And, it's easier to accept that too, I think, if you don't expect your relationship to be your problem solver or your fix all or your completion or your savior. I see a lot of people out there endorsing these ideas that your relationship should make your life better, or your partner should make your life easier, or your partner needs to bring you peace.
Oh
And
yeah, I
I'm
was going to
like,
say that one. That is just so hysterical when I
ah,
see
and
that.
I'm
Oh my
like,
gosh.
yeah,
Really?
no, nope, nope. Here's the deal. Life sucks. There's suffering and satisfaction. And it's nice to have someone to go through the shit with you. You know, like they're not
That is
saving
just
you.
great.
They're not
That is
shielding
just great.
you. They're
They're not
just
making it
coming along.
easier
They're
necessarily,
just
right?
coming along for the ride. Yeah, it's so you don't have an empty seat in the roller coaster.
Oh, that is just a great way of explaining it. I
Thank
also,
you.
your wife should bring you peace. I'm thinking to myself, hey, I've got 6 kids and I
She
come home
she
from work and
multiplies noise, not peace. No, I know I have five. We have five, so yeah.
oh yeah, there you go, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what are you talking about? Your wife, you know, that's not really the way this works. She's not like an adjunct to, my life. As a man, I look at it quite the opposite, that it's my job to bring stability and emotional kind of solidity to the relationship. I expect my wife to be completely frazzled when I get home from work. I expect her to be very emotional about, whatever's going on in her life, and for her to need enormous amounts of emotional support.
Mhm.
Not the other way, as a man, I don't look at it the other way around. Not saying that there haven't been plenty of times when I've leaned on her, of course. But part of my role as a man is to provide emotional shelter for her. And to hear other men talk about that their wives are supposed to, then they call me beta, right? And then they're like the alpha, and that their wife is supposed to give them peace. Like,
Yeah.
really? That's what an alpha male is supposed to be like, have a wife that gives him peace? I don't see it that way.
No.
It seems like such a weak position to take.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be the rock. You're supposed to be the source of support. You're supposed to be the one that's immobile in terms of your emotional strength.
Mm-hmm.
You're the sun giving out warmth to your wife and children, not the other way around.
Yeah. And it's like, and isn't that something you would stand proud in and want to affirm for yourself in
Of
confidence and
course.
boldness? Because for me, that's just an optimal role to step into, right? You house your woman's emotions and you help house her and shelter her. But a woman also provides a complementary role to her husband as well. And there's not a need for us to break with those roles or norms, I wouldn't say. I think it's just more about acceptance of who we are individually and in our feminine or masculine essence, and recognizing that we were created in these opposing, not even opposing ways, just different ways so that we would provide a proper balance for one another in our life. It's, and to stand firm in that, like, I too see these ideals that if I'm too feminine or if I do too much for my husband, I'm a simp, right? Or I've been brainwashed by feminists or by um, the patriarchy. And I'm like, no, this is just what I want to do for my husband. Um, I haven't been brainwashed by anything. I just, it just feels natural to me to be this way and to be in
Yeah,
my energy and to just accept it and not be ashamed by it and not think I have to change it for society.
totally. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful perspective.
Thank you.
And this comes up, again, in the marriage program a lot. People talk to me about my philosophy on marriage in general. And one thing that I explain right from the get-go, I say marriage itself is a traditional construct.
Mhm.
It is by itself a traditional construct. If you want the outcomes of a good marriage, you have to play by its rules.
Mhm.
You can't change up the rules, quote unquote, open marriage or, polygamy, and they don't even talk about real polygamy, but, you know,
Polyamory. Yeah, it's different.
polyamory
Yeah.
or even having relationships outside of marriage or
Mhm.
even within a monogamous marriage, the role of the masculine and the feminine. If you want the outcomes of a good marriage, you have to play by its rules.
Mhm.
And it's a traditional construct. You can do something else. You don't have to call it marriage. You can just call it something else. But you can't come to me because I'm a very traditional person, which is something I explain to my clients right away. And there's a lot of reasons why they like to come to me. I'm a traditional person, so I'm going to approach your marriage in a traditional way because I want the best outcomes for this traditional thing called marriage.
Mhm.
If you're on board, you'll have a lot of success. If you try to fight these roles, then you probably aren't going to get what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's just being objectively honest about what it is rather than letting it emotionally affect you because this construct has existed longer really than your feelings. So,
Totally, you know,
yeah. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation and I really appreciate you
too.
taking time to come on and, help talk about these social conversations. Hopefully, they'll bring a little bit of a wider, considerate perspective to the listeners. And I'll be sure to make sure that everybody knows how to connect with you
Sure,
in the
absolutely.
show notes on the podcast. But if you wouldn't mind, if you would just tell the audience where they can find you on Twitter.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, great. First of all, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, Danielle. It's just been really, really nice. Thank you. It's kindred spirits here. It looks like, we share Twitters together and we have very similar philosophies, which is nice.
Yeah, it is
Always nice
nice.
because I spend a lot of my time, arguing online. So every once in a while, it's nice to speak to
It's
somebody
nice to
who
just commiserate and agree and resonate. You don't need to debate.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the funnest place to find me is on Twitter, of course, at my first name, last name, at Dovid, Dovid, Feldman, Feldman. Not many people spell their name that way. So the good news is that I actually have the same website, www.dovidfeldman.com. My Instagram is at Dovid Feldman, and my YouTube is at Dovid Feldman. So
So it
pretty
should be
easy.
easy to find you. And I'll make sure I just attach all those links in the podcast notes to make it easier for anyone. As soon as they're
Yeah,
done listening, they can just go click on you. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And I look forward to more interactions with you, David.
sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.